Thank you for joining us. This is episode 3 of the Freak Time Mastermind podcast with today's guest, Benny Vonkin from Via Stoica, and also his own podcast, which is Street Stoics. He co-hosts with Bryce Noble on Street Stoics. And the question today is, can Stoicism help you and help your business? We'll talk about what Stoicism is, what it isn't, and how it can help you. Also, Benny is a world traveler and a digital nomad, and we'll touch a little bit into that story as well. And without further ado, here's Benny. First and foremost, where in the world are you right now? People would be interested to know that.
That's a good question. I wonder myself sometimes. I'm currently in Panama. I just arrived like a few days ago. I'm actually here visiting 2 friends I met online on like X with some spaces, and we've been talking for like a year and a half. And they went, they were going on a trip, so they said, "Why don't you come by and you can stay here?" So I'm on a small coffee farm, and looking after the house, and they're still here. So it's and he's also one of my business partners, so that's really cool. So we get to meet up in real life. That's always a good experience.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll get to see some photos of the coffee farm. Are you close to Panama City, Panama, or are you kind of out in the country?
I'm out in the country. It's like a 7-hour bus ride. It's like maybe an hour and a half by an hour by plane. So it's closer to Costa Rica actually than Panama City.
For people that don't know, can you describe for people what is Stoicism?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of misconceptions about Stoicism, but basically what its goal is to live a more peaceful life and in accordance with your nature, and that's being done by virtue ethics, right? That's the major thing, like living in accordance with virtue, which is wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. And it's really a philosophy about life, and a practical, pragmatic philosophy that you can apply on any part of your life, business, financials, but mainly about yourself. So what it does, it really kind of separates you from the external world. Like there's the dichotomy of control to really see like what can you control and what can't you control. So it is really, and that is one of the things that really appealed to me. I'm a very practical and pragmatic person, and there is not a lot of excuses to be made in Stoicism. It's up to you, right? You take responsibility for your life, but you do it in like one of the virtues is temperance. So you do it in a balanced way, and it's all about finding yourself, learning about yourself, and being more at peace with yourself.
I like the sound of that. As a matter of fact, and not to plug my own business, but in the mastermind group, there is something that I post very frequently, and it's the circle of control versus the circle of concern. So, and I've been guilty of this because I love talking about politics, especially geopolitics. It's just interesting. It's a very big chessboard, and it's interesting to talk about the pieces and various interests. I like to think about it in terms of economics, the motivation. So, what the news might say is one thing, but, the economics, it really kind of explain why things are the way they are. But I've been guilty of spending too much time on things like that, which is outside of the circle of my control. So if I stay inside the circle of concern, care for my neighbors, care for my friends, my coworkers, the aspects of my life that I can have a positive effect, because I can't affect what happens in the Middle East or anywhere else. I can think about it. It's okay to be conscious of it, but I can't speak for anyone else, but I am much happier when I'm inside that circle of control, the elements where I can make a positive impact. If I spend too much mental energy on those things beyond that I have absolutely no effect on, people can get, and myself can get, very frustrated. So it sounds like Stoicism is very much aligned with staying inside the circle of control and not concerning yourself with these far-flung things you can't make a positive impact on.
Yeah, exactly. And there are more like, techniques like accepting your fate, amor fati, memento mori, remember that you'll die, life is precious because it's limited. But one of these things, and sometimes Stoicism is seen like a selfish philosophy about, all about yourself. But it is also very strong with community, as you mentioned, like friends, family, neighbors. But if we are not the best version of ourselves, then we can't be the best version for the people around us. So it starts with ourselves and then building it outward. And I like how you brought about, like we think about like the the things in the other parts of the world, and especially if you travel. I was here in November in Panama, and there was a national strike, and everything was closed for the month that I was here, and that's like, okay, I can't control it. Let's make the best out of it. But even with a business, like we are trying to, you have leads, you're trying to get clients to sign up, and the Stoics, they say you can only do your best, and when you're meeting with them. So you do your pitch, you do your conversation, you do your thing, and then it's up to them, right? At one point, it's like, okay, you can do the follow ups and all that stuff, but then Stoicism says, okay, then it's out of your hands. You've done your best. You can learn from that, see what you can improve, but there's no need to go and sit in despair, like, oh, why are they not signing? No, you just keep going, right? You go to the next, and you're learning, and I think that that's one of the things that also in business and in all other aspects of life, it all comes back. You can always apply these teachings, and that's the great thing about this philosophy.
So as you've traveled externally, were you an internal explorer before you became an external explorer, or did you start that process of self-discovery while you were on the road? So when did you start to turn the eye inward, so to speak?
Yeah, I think somewhere along the road, like I've lived outside of the Netherlands for over like 14 years. So, and I was a lot younger when I started. So I think that inward journey usually starts a little bit later, usually when you meet some obstacles. Like if you ask people, like, when did you start with a certain philosophy or self-improvement or self-growth? It's usually when you hit kind of, a wall, or sometimes even rock bottom. I didn't hit rock bottom, but I did meet some obstacles, and that's when you start that self exploration and really start to ask yourself, the deep questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Even with traveling, like I've asked myself those questions, like, why am I traveling? Is it escapism? Is it, am I dealing with some other things from my childhood or whatever? And I've come to really the terms to like why I'm doing it in a better place right now. So I'm even more at peace when I travel, because it is very nice to go and travel, but you can see around, a lot of people might do it for the externals, to get all the pictures, to see all the, to show it to the people, or that escapism. So getting those answers are really important as well.
Absolutely. At what point in that journey did you discover Stoicism and say, okay, this is a great tool to put inside of my toolbox for to get through life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I moved to Dubai at one point to teach English, and that's where, like, personal life things kind of messed. We were in a bit turmoil, and that's where I really started to go and delve into the teachings. And I have like one clear example where I knew that this was going to be a practical thing for me to apply in my daily life was with coworkers. I had a coworker in the school where I worked, and this person was playing tricks. He was making me feel frustrated. He would come into my classroom and kind of disrupted in a sense, even when I was being observed, like by my superior, and I was getting frustrated by it, and it was making me angry. So I read Marcus Aurelius, and in one of his quotes, he says, this person is bound to be like that. It's like getting angry at a fig tree for secreting juice. So the next day I go to work, and I was like, I can't change this person. Right? This is the fig tree, and me, getting annoyed by him is like touching that tree and being, having sticky fingers and being angry at that. It's like, I can't change you, but I can change myself and how I deal with you. And by recognizing certain behaviors, I can prepare myself better. And that's when I really saw that this is something that I can actually apply in life. And I've been doing that for many, for many reasons. In traffic, for example, when I go out to traffic, I tell myself, okay, I'm going to be driving. And if I'm on the road, I'm going to meet people who drive slow or drive fast. We're going to do all these silly things that might aggravate you. And by setting off with that, it is like, okay, I know what I'm gonna see, and then you see the humor in it. Then you can kind of laugh about it. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that this was gonna come. So kind of you prepare yourself for those things. So it is very practical, like in all parts of life, even with with business, with traveling, with family. You can find so many ways of putting it into practice. It's great to see.
And at some point you decided, well, you even demonstrated, which was perfect foreshadowing, that you learned the tool, you started to apply it, you started to see positive changes, you started to share it, and at some point you thought this should be a business. So I want to ask, because what we're talking about, the website is Via Stoica, and
Yeah.
of course the company name I would assume is the same as the URL, Via Stoica. did the business come first or did the podcast come first? Because there's also the podcast Street Stoics, which is associated with that. Which of those two came first?
Actually, there's a few steps before that, and I think the
Ah,
story is really one of those where it's like you are solving a problem for yourself that you find that is a problem for other people around you. So one of the things, like I started writing a blog, like I look at myself and I see like all the cliches, you blog, the podcast, like I'm doing them all, but I'm doing them with a purpose to help other people. That's my main goal. Like I remember driving home from work at one point, and my parents are getting a little bit older, and at one point the pandemic, and I said I don't want to have to work, but I want to have my freedom of time and place to do the thing that I'm passionate about to help as many people as I can. And that includes like my parents. So I want to have that freedom that if something happens with my family, I can go there. Like I love traveling, but I want to have that opportunity to go there. So I figured there's got to be a way to do that. And so I started, thinking about philosophy and all my head and thoughts in my head, and I was just getting kind of fumbling around and messed up in my head. So it's like I've got to write this down because otherwise I might forget it. And I was writing it for myself, but it was still very blurry. So I figured let's write this in a blog for other people to read. So I've got to do it more structured. And also one of the things, like I was very sensitive to criticism. So I figured like how can I best learn to deal with this better by putting stuff out there online, because where can you find criticism? So especially in Facebook groups that were on stoicism. So I started writing my blog, putting it out there, and I've learned so much from it because there are people there who just tear it apart. You use this word wrong, you use that word wrong. And at the beginning I would be up all night. It's like, how am I going to reply to this? How am I going to, oh, they said this, am I wrong? I just started looking at the books, and after a while I was like, okay, maybe there's some truth in what they said. Let's see. So I started dealing with it a lot better. I started replying to them. Some I just let I was like, okay, you're right, whatever. But the good thing about that is like I started writing the blog, and then I figured, okay, I want people to read this blog. So I started posting it on these Facebook groups, and I started posting it on Twitter, on X, what is now X. And the great thing there is like as I started posting and people saw like, oh, you're talking about stoicism, I got an invite for Spaces. I don't know if you're familiar with Spaces on X.
not very, but I've read a little bit about it. But actually, for the people that are watching this, can you give us all a little bit of an education?
Yeah, they're amazing. Like I've met some really great people there, and obviously there's some spaces that are quite toxic or whatever. But there's like a version of Clubhouse on other platforms. I think LinkedIn has these things as these platforms as well. It's pretty much a live conversation. So what I do, as an example, like every Tuesday, and with Bryce and Brendan, my partners from Via Stoica, they have a space on Thursday and on Saturday, and we talk about stoicism. So I put a topic on Tuesday, and then I open the room, and people join, and people can listen, or they can request a mic, and they can come up and speak. And we've been doing this for over 2 years now. So like 2 years ago, some people, they approached me, it's like, we're going to start a room on stoicism. Would you like to join us? I was like, yeah, of course. I want to talk about this stuff. And like in my small village and where I travel, there's not a lot of people who talk about stoicism. So I started going to those rooms. I really learned a lot about public speaking, listening, making good contributions, presenting myself better. This is without video, by the way. So it's just audio, which is a good kind of way to get in. And they started
Sure.
doing the rooms, and then after like maybe like 6-7 months, they said like it's too much for us. So I don't know if someone can take over. So I started taking over.
Wow.
So I started hosting these spaces, together with Bryce, my co-host, and I started helping him on a Saturday where we go through the text. First we did Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations, and Epictetus. Now we're doing Seneca. We're going through them like verbatim, so line by line, and just kind of delving into them and seeing what they're about. And the great thing about that was kind of the eye-opening space for me, because that was pretty much me and Bryce just talking about this stuff for 2 hours, and people would just come and listen. Like we had 40, 50 people. Like sometimes we had like 100 or 200 replays. And I told them, it's like, people just come here to listen. We need to do something with this. And we used to, like, after the space, talk about it for like 2 hours or an hour more. And we said, like, let's record this. So that's kind of where the podcast came about. We started going from one day, and it's just about a passion, right? We can talk about this for like hours and hours on end. So we said, okay, let's do this podcast. And we started doing that, and we kind of joined the spaces together because we found Brendan doing his spaces based on the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. So he's like, okay, let's join. I started helping him out, and Bryce joined, and we started helping each other out. So that's where we really got together, the three of us. And so the podcast came about, and I came here to Panama in November, and we said, let's build this. Let's just build something together. And that's where, via Stoica came. It's really kind of an organic process, starting from like, let's help people, let's get this message out, let's share it. And now we want to kind of focus it more to reach even more people.
And it looks like we launched at the same time, because the Freak Time Mastermind was also birthed in November, which I had much more time on my hands at that time, and that's changed. But I'm charging forward anyway. I don't need to sleep as much, and I was probably sleeping too much anyway. So we're charging ahead. But I think people would be interested to know, because Bryce and Brendan, of course, are involved on. They're mentioned on the site as well. But just for people here, and I want to back up just a little bit, because again, some people don't have the technological awareness of how to get to Spaces. So first, let's start off and say, is Spaces, is that accessible through X? Is its own website? How would somebody get to that and find Spaces on Stoicism?
Yeah, it's quite easy everybody can make their own space. So you need an X account.
Okay.
And where you have like you create a post button, there's some options, and you can make your own space. And then people just put like maybe like an emoji and start a space, and people join, or they talk about, there's a lot of rooms about crypto, about politics. And some of these rooms, they go like about 400 people, like thousands of people go into the spaces, right? And there's like, everybody can start a space. It's just a matter of like, is the topic interesting, and you can join these spaces. You can find them everywhere. So the main thing, like if you want to find specific spaces by specific people, for example, on Stoicism, what we do, then you follow those people and you set the reminder, and you get a notification when the space starts. Like we have it on on fixed hours, on fixed days, so people find us, and we get a lot of regular people joining us. But everybody can start a space. You just need an X account and build it from there. Like we started out with maybe 10, 20 people at the beginning, and now we get like hundreds of people, like in the replays, because you record it and you put it out there, and people, it is like some kind of like a podcast at one point.
Bryce and Brendan, tell us how they came into the fold, when they came into the fold, and what their respective roles are with the company.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'll start from my side. Like when I started this blog, I started writing purely about Stoicism, and we started with the spaces. And for example, Bryce, he's very good he's worked for WPKN, a radio station in the I think it's the Midwest, and he's done with a podcast there, so he has got more experience on that side, and he's been doing a lot of hosting on the spaces. So he's been kind of my mentor in that sense, to really help me get better at the public speaking and all of that stuff. So that was kind of going on through the spaces. And at one point, like as I was traveling, and I left my job in Dubai in like 2 years ago. So at one point I was like, I've got to make some money with this. I was doing it first just to kind of share my message and just to grow personally. So I wrote a page about Stoic life coaching. And I don't know what happened, but it's still ranking number 1 on Google. So that's like, wow. So Stoic life coaching, Stoic coaching. So I think I was like, I hit something there, right? And after a few weeks, I got like my first client. And so that was kind of picking up. So we started talking about this, and that's where it kind of started brewing. So Bryce is like, he takes care of the podcast. Like he's kind of the leader, or the driving force behind the podcast and what we do together. And Brendan is joining us there as well, but he's more like the media kind of guy, and he's very good at public relations and building all of that stuff. Apart from the coaching, that's something that we all do. And then we have Brendan, who is he's very business savvy. He's a business consultant. That's what he does. So I figured, and I'm not very good at it. That's again something that I need to learn. I did start my own language school in Spain, like that's before I left. So I have some experience with that, with businesses. But he's like professional, like he does this for a job. So that was awesome to get him on board. So he's really like asking the good questions. It's like, what are we doing it? Why are we doing it for? And even like the drive to make money. That's kind of something that we put a little bit on the backdrop, right? Just to make sure that it's focused on bringing value and focused on the reasons why we're doing it. Why the three of us are applying Stoicism. It's to help people live better, right? That's pretty much our main goal, what we're doing it for. So and he's looking at like, okay, we need to have some outside help, right? Some external help to, for example, to build up the website, to get some SEO people helping us with the podcast, and audio editor. So we all kind of come together in the right way. Everybody has their different roles, and we have meetings every week, which is great, and we have different visions on the philosophy and the business, and that really keeps us kind of steered in the one direction. So we all have our different roles in this, and that's really great to see. And for me as a person, as a selfish kind of reason, I'm learning so much from them, which is really great for me to kind of build myself up. And and my role is like the writing and just kind of because they still have like jobs, and I quit my job and this is my full-time thing. So I do like I build a website myself with Brendan. Like the last time I was here, we went like for a little retreat to Costa Rica, and we said like, okay, let's do this, let's build it ourselves. And that's pretty much we did for the last couple of months. And now we need like to bring it to the next step. We're looking for some external professional help to really set it up right. So yeah, no, that's kind of the roles and how it fits together, which is great, because we have a lot of personal conversations in the backdrop about the philosophy, and now also about the company.
Fantastic. I haven't cheated and looked at my notes yet. I think I got it memorized. I looked at it a few times before before we got started. And so, but you're doing such a great job at foreshadowing the next question, the next so you're almost guiding me. It's almost like you have the paper, so you know
Oh,
what
nice.
I'm going to ask next. So on Via Stoica, obviously we talked about consulting, and working with people one on one. Let me start off by saying, who is the perfect client for you guys? Like when you think about, in other words, not just the demographic that you're trying to reach from a marketing perspective,
Mhm.
but for you personally, because that might be a slightly different demographic. Who would is the perfect client for you? So if somebody's sitting there and they fit this description, that's the person that needs to reach out to you. What group of people do you think you have the most effect on?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and we are looking into it. But one of the things that is great about the podcast, and we get a lot of statistics there, we see a lot of people who listen to it, right? And it seems to be, especially when we talk about Stoicism, it is a very male-centered philosophy, right? Although the funny thing is, in the spaces, we get a lot of women who join us there, and they share a lot of their thoughts, and they're also into Stoicism, which is great, just see that. But when we look at how most people find us, that's through to Google, and that's mainly men. And it's a lot of the times people who are in that moment where they're just kind of in transition, right? In that kind of change. And how I started, I diagnosed myself with an existential crisis, and that's how I kind of started doing all these things. And I think that is the main goal. I think our main audience is between like, early 30s, beginning 50s, something like that. And people who just kind of feel like they need to have a change. They feel like they're a little bit stuck, and they need a kind of a more intrinsic guide to live that more peaceful life, and maybe detract themselves a little bit from the externals that they might be focusing on. So it is mainly men. We really try to focus us on like men and women. But if we look at the statistics and we look at what's going out there, I think the male in market with that age group, that is really our kind of client. And also when we see what's kind of that toxic masculinity is kind of rising up, and telling people to suck it up and just like just plow through. And that's the thing what men has been taught, right? It's like if you have to ask for support or help, then you're kind of weak. And we want to show like, no, it is a good thing, right? And that's why we are here, because if you need to really sort things out from the inside to make sure that you can do all the other side. And I'm not saying that when they say, oh, go to the gym or do that it's bad, but you need to do it for the right reasons. So I think that is kind of what we are looking for, to give people that guidance and ask themselves, okay, why are you doing this? And again, we are not therapists or we are coaches, right? We are basing our foundation and backdrop is stoicism. So it's not even to turn people into stoics, but it's just giving them the tools, right? It's giving them the teachings to help them, guide them through those difficult moments, and the questions that they have, and kind of steer them in the right direction.
Are you thinking about doing a membership model, or is it just hourly, one-on-one at this point?
Yeah, that's the process where we're in right now. Like we are doing the hourly at the moment. That's the thing that we have. But as we are developing products. And again, like we said, we want to make sure that we offer the right value. So we are doing a lot of things for free at the moment. The spaces are completely free for everybody to join. The podcasts,
Podcasts.
podcasts. We do monthly meetups for people to just join on a Zoom call where we just have like a more personal chat. We do the newsletter. All these things are for free, and we're using that kind of to develop the message, to develop like an audience, and from then we do want to build up those kind of lower ticket items for people to step in sooner, because we have seen that people do need that guidance, but the coaching might just be a little bit too expensive. So we are, we are developing the lower ticket items just to give people that extra help that they need.
Now, since you've written so much, so it's definitely sounds like you're the writer of the group. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, yeah.
So with all of that blog material that you have out there, do you have a book in the works? Are you thinking about it? Are you starting to put those ideas together? Because it sounds like that would be a natural, logical progression for you as published author, unless you've done it already and I just don't know about it.
I haven't done it because this is the thing that I've been struggling with the book. I want to have the right angle. Like I do a lot of things out intuition, like, and this is why it's good to have Brendan and Bryce to kind of have a more of a, a planned kind of direction. But I'm more of like I jump, and then I see if I have the tools to make a parachute, and if not, I'll just see where I land. That's kind of how I've been doing the same thing with the blog. I just started writing, and as I kind of went along, I evolved in my writing style and all that stuff. I even like every morning and every evening I write like a kind of a digital journal, which is turned into poetry. And it's like I use like the limited space on X posts, and I put like an AI image. So that's kind of how it developed. And maybe I'll turn that into a book. But I have thought about making it into a book, but there's so many books on already nowadays on stoicism, like the introduction or how can it help or practical stoicism. So I am looking for that right angle to at least satisfy my own views of like adding something more personal and a little bit more specific. But at the end of the day, we are thinking about like writing an ebook, because there's so like I have the material pretty much for to fill a couple of books. So I think that it is worth it while to just investigate it and find that
Sure.
angle and just do it, because I think there are people who would really like to read it.
I wanted to ask too that some of the stoicism that I've read reminds me a little bit of Zen Buddhism, because of course
Hmm.
Zen is very much about, so like we're very engaged in this conversation. I'm not thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow or my schedule. I'm very invested in this conversation, and I try to be present in all things that I do. And that's the Zen Buddhism that I try to practice. I'm not perfect at it. I slip, and every now and then I slip and slide. But Stoicism does seem to be, from a timeline perspective, living in the present, because a Stoic I wouldn't think would get too concerned about things far out on the timeline. Do you see any commonalities between Zen Buddhism and Stoicism?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like obviously there's a misconception about stoicism around the world now, especially in the social media area. But if people ask me like, how would you describe it? I would say it's the Western version of Buddhism and Taoism, right?
Oh, I've never heard it put that way. That's fantastic.
And it is a little bit different. Like, for example, Stoicism is more based on action. Well, if you look at Taoism, it's more about, not doing, and that's also a form of doing, like that Wu Wei, going with the flow,
Yes,
kind of
yes.
like feeling if something is feeling well, if it feels good to you, then I can do it. If there's friction, then I'm not going to do it. So it's a little bit more, people would say it's a little bit more passive. I think there's still a lot of action, still a lot of, doing in it, but stoicism is really like, okay, I'm focusing on the now, right? As you said, like the past is gone, it's out of my control. The future is something I have a certain vision, but it's uncertain, right? And there's like techniques called negative visualization where you say, okay, what are the things that can happen? How can I prepare? But I'm not going to ruminate over it, because as I know at one point it's like it's still kind of, it's still not happened, right? So there's like this quote by Seneca. He says, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. That's when people get too stuck in the future. But the Stoics, they say it's very mindful. It's like this is the moment that you have agency on, and now you've got to focus and on what you've got to do. And one of the things that traveling really has taught me, because as you move, I've moved a lot these last couple of years, maybe a little bit too much, but you meet people, right? And you meet them very flighty. It's like here a week or 2 weeks there. And I was, I spent 7 months with my parents, but even that time goes really quick and you start to get used to it and take it for granted. But I was there like having breakfast with them every morning. It's like, I'm here right now. This is amazing that I have the opportunity to still spend this time with them. And if I meet people on trips, and even like in this conversation, I put my phone down, I don't look at it. It's me in the interaction with them. And then when it's over, I say, okay, it was great to meet you. I really enjoyed this moment. And now is the next. Right. And it's not about like dismissing it. No, it's like I really enjoyed it. So that's why with the Buddhism and the Taoism, it is really connected. There are differences, but I think at the end of the day, it is really living in that moment, living mindfully, being grateful for it, appreciating it, and then just seeing what comes next.
Let's limit it to the last 5 years. Have you had any mentors you've worked with in the last 5 years that have made an impact on you?
Um, yeah, again, various. Like I think like people on the public speaking way, like that would be someone like Bryce, like for the last couple of years that we've been working on. But I've also had a very close friend that I worked with in Dubai who is very much into literature, and I wasn't a very big reader because I didn't really know what to read, and he really gave me some good titles, some good books. So I really started with him to read some, like, first science fiction and some of those books, and then I started reading more into the philosophical and pick up on the books that I read before, but now with real like intentional. And like the last few years that I lived in Dubai, my life was work in the morning, have lunch, read my book, and write. That was pretty much the last couple of years that I did, because I was focused. Like I was, that first year in Dubai, you get used to it. You get more money coming in, and you kind of live it up. And I'm always like, this is not going to last. Like I'm not building any pension because I've lived abroad so many years. So I figured I've got to do something with this. And what kind of life do I want to build? So I started becoming very focused and intentional on that. And he really gave me that guidance of intellectual development that I needed by reading the right books and just talking about them. We used to have like very long philosophical conversations just when we took for a coffee, went for a coffee, and also the financial aspects, just to kind of learn how to invest, make sure that I build my own pension fund for myself, which I'm doing at the same time. So all of those kind of things, they are important, right? So if I look at that, yeah, again, my family, my father, my sisters, I can always go to them. But I have had some good friends, and then even now with Brendan as well, Bryce and Brendan, they really kind of steer me into that direction with public speaking and the business. And one friend who lived in the US, he's like, I can be quite of an introvert, and he's the one that kind of sometimes pushes me to go and be more outward. I went to visit him last year, and he lived in Bend, Oregon, and he would work in the mornings, and I would be like doing in the mornings my reading, my writing. And as soon as he came in, I was like, okay, now I've got to flip the switch, and now things are going to happen, And he would walk in, let's, put on your hiking boots. We're going to go, and I like that. That's sometimes what you need to get yourself out of the bubble. So, yeah, for mentors, like, yeah, I think I've had a lot of them on different levels in my life.
Sure. Well, one thing I think you're breaking another misconception about Stoicism. So, and this is, I believe it's a misconception because just based visually on some of the pages that talk about Stoicism, and you're exactly right, Stoicism is a lot of times, uh, whether rightfully so or not, associated with the manosphere. So these men's groups and so forth, but it's way more than that. And the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius is has no gender. I mean, wisdom is wisdom, and he was exceptionally brilliant among Seneca, Epictetus, and the others. I mean, that's where their work still survives, because it appeals to all audiences and all cultures. In India, they know about Epictetus and Seneca, and so it breaks through gender, race, culture. It's relevant universally. But the thing that I think that you break is that Stoicism is often seems like it's associated with this hermit lifestyle, and I don't. None of these great Stoic philosophers were very solitary. Most of them lived in the society or among the agora, kind of out in the open, and that's very important. I think there are a lot of Stoic lone wolves, and they get very academic about the philosophy, and they might even be living congruently with it. But if they're not connecting with other people, whatever they're trying to do isn't going to go as far or as fast as they want. You cannot get through this life alone, and that's one reason why we have a collaborative group, so that we can all pull together. And of course, you've been very good about reaching out to other people. Um, because there's a lot of digital nomads out there. They run the streets, they go home, they watch their YouTube, they stare at their phone, and they don't really interact with a lot of people outside of who's at the bar or who's at work or whatever. But it sounds like you've got great work balance because you've got very rich, deep personal relationships with the people around you. Whereas Stoicism always seems to have this almost unfair lone wolf image. And there are those people out there, but I don't think they have the quality of life that you have. But I do have another question. This is highly specific. So, in all of your travels, you've bumped into people of all different cultures. Who did you have, if you can think of an example, where you've had a very brief interaction with someone, with a stranger, but something they said or did, or emotion or a gesture or word or phrase that stuck with you, was just the right thing in the right moment? Have you had anything happen like that lightning strike?
And maybe not the brief part. And this is funny. Like I did have that when I met my ex-wife, because she was from, and obviously we've had a longer. That wasn't a brief kind of meeting, but it was like she was from Morocco, and I was from a very tiny village in the Netherlands. And for me, that's where it really started to see. That's where I started to see the importance of traveling, because she had a completely different view of the world. And I was, for example, on news items, right? I was like, oh, this is the way to look at it. And she's like, well, this is another way of looking at it. So for me, that was kind of like opening your eyes to see there's another view of the world. And once I got that, you really start to see that everywhere. And the interesting thing that I've seen over my travels is that the core, people want the same. People want to have a good life for themselves and for the people around them, and for just to live in peace, right? But at the details and how we view the life, that is kind of a different way. So for me, that was kind of an eye opener, and that started my travels. And I've had I've had many good conversations around here that I've met. But I think the most impactful things have been on those spaces where you just hear someone say something, and as you mentioned, that's where we build that community. And Stoicism isn't just that lone wolf kind of idea. That's what people get wrong. But there is a sense of being centered with yourself. And again, one quote from Seneca, he says, the wise person is content with themselves, but they still look for social context, right? They don't deny that. They do seek it, but if it doesn't happen, then they are fine with themselves. But building that community and building that support group, and we get a lot of really good reactions from those spaces where people say, oh, you really helped me get over some things, and that makes you feel good. And those are some of the things that drive you, right? Those brief contacts with people where there's just one DM that sends you, right, oh wow, that was something that I needed to hear. So for me, that's kind of that inspirational wave of like, I've got to keep doing this.
And you've seen a lot on well, that's another episode, just your journey, because was it 12 or 14 years on the road?
I left, and even before that, I lived in Malaysia for 6 months, and then I moved to Spain in 2010. When the crisis hit, and because I studied tourism, and someone said, "Why don't you go teach English in Spain?" I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." So I went there. I stayed there for 7 years, and so yeah, and then the last 2 years, that's when I've really started moving around a lot more, like to travel,
So that's
the U.S. and South America. Yeah,
and that's its own, like I said, that's its own episode. We'll get
yeah.
around to that. But I also wanted to ask a technical question, getting back to the podcast. I noticed that obviously you're on Spotify, you're on the Apple podcast. For people out there that have a podcast or they're wanting to start one, do you have any advice? Are there certain platforms that are better? What's working for you guys better? Because I think on your site, you post your podcast, I think at least on a dozen different places. There was all these icons I could go to and check your guys. And also on your website itself, you have your podcast episodes, which is fantastic, because if Spotify loses all your data, you still have it.
Yeah.
But are you seeing more? Which of those platforms are you guys seeing the most benefit of being a part of?
So we use Buzzsprout as our like platform that our hosting platform. So we put our episodes on Buzzsprout, which is really easy to use, and then
Ah,
we can link it to like Apple, Spotify, I think Player FM, Heart FM, all these other things. Like again, this is more like Bryce's area. He really
sure,
kind of because
sure.
he had the experience with this. But then you connect it from that, and you get a lot of good stats from Buzzsprout. Not perfect, but you get enough, and you get some from Apple and Spotify. But I think that is a really easy platform to use. You can also use some of their audio editing software, which isn't the best. Like we did hire someone as well because my time is a little bit too precious to, and I've tried it at the beginning, and I spent like hours to do edit an episode, and it was still wasn't good. So I just said like let's hire someone, right? Just to get it out there and get someone to do it. And also like one advice for me is just to keep it fun. If you
Sure.
feel like there are things that you don't really want to do, outsource it. If you really want to make it, you've got to spend a little bit of money, outsource it, and then just enjoy the conversations that you have. And that's what we've been doing. But platform wise, Buzzsprout has been great, and then you just source it out to yourself. And the website, as you said, I think it is good to have those links there, just to kind of SEO wise. It's good to have links out everywhere, but also to give people like a way to find you. Like we have streetstoics.com, and we have a link to the page on Via Stoica. So we didn't have to build a specific website for it. It just kind of moves it all the way there. So it saves you a little bit more time. It kind of puts it in the same place, and it adds like kind of the extra links that are out there. So I think that helps as well.
I think I'll put a link there too because I'm sure there's a subscription along with what's it called, Buzzsprout that I did because I
Yeah,
think that's Buzzsprout. So there's probably I assume a monthly membership for that service, which it's probably
yeah.
not much, but it's worth it because you're transmitting. Just like we're on my Zoom Pro account right now, and technically, if I wanted to, I could be live on Facebook and um, YouTube right now simultaneously because this has the integration, but if I wanted to go on other platforms, I would have to have another piece of software. I was actually shocked when I started this how many different pieces of software and how many different companies you have to go through and have subscriptions for. You think in 2024 you buy one program and you can edit it. Oh no, you need a editing. It's unreal. So I decided to have this done by somebody else, and that's a big thing that we push in our group too. Play to your strengths. If your thing, Benny, is writing, you make your money, you're happiest when you're writing. Some people might be happier when they're selling. Some people might be happier when they're on camera. Um, and if we focus on not only just the things that we're doing better, but also the part of our business that actually brings in the income, because obviously if we're not making income, it's going to be hard to continue. And I personally, I don't want to take 40 hours learning how to edit video. I have a background in audio editing, but that was from a very long time ago, right when they were changing from tape to digital. So
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the principles of it, but again, I'm just shocked that Zoom and some of these other programs don't have more tools integrated in them because Zoom is losing a lot of business because I have to go to Audacity, for instance, which is a big
Hmm.
audio editing program. But I think eventually, as these companies start to buy other companies, well, we might have the one size fit all podcast solution. But you guys being audio only, it obviously makes it a little bit easier. And how can people find you? So it's via Stoica, and for the spelling, we'll have that on the site, and we'll have and what was the website specifically for the podcast? Because I know you can access it through Via Stoica, but I didn't realize you guys had a whole separate URL for that.
Yeah, so it's streetstoics.com. So yeah, and that leads to Via Stoica where you find all the episodes. So that's kind of, we bought the domain and we just kind of steered it to the same place. And yeah, and Via Stoica is the place where we have everything like the coaching and where we just build everything. And our main presence is on X. Like I'm big on Facebook groups. I love Facebook groups because they can really give you the access to the specific groups that you want, like the people that you want to target.
Sure.
Although we are not targeting Stoic people per se, we are targeting people who could benefit from Stoicism. Like I'm not promoting the coaching products in the Stoic groups, but I'm using them to to elevate the blog post, or to really challenge my own beliefs, my writings, get that kind of things. But I'm not, and even on X, I don't think like that's like we do like we building the community there. I think that is the main thing for X, to build the community, to find the people that can benefit from it in the way that we offer. So that's the main thing. Like if you want to get in touch with us, like on obviously through the website, but on X, that's where we're like you can listen to us weekly live there.
And
Me,
how do
Glenn,
they
and
find you
Bryson.
on X? Do they type something specifically into that?
So yeah, my name on X is the Stoic Padawan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Star Wars, and so for me, I was like, I'm a little bit of a nerd in that sense. So when I saw that those names are still available, like my previous website was the stoicpadawan.com, and then we redirected it everything to Via Stoica. So I was like, oh wow, this is amazing, the Stoic, and then a student, the Jedi learner, and it's like that's still available. So I'm the Stoic Padawan, but I think if you look Benny and the Stoic, then you'll probably find me as well. You have Stoic Bryce and Stoic Boggles. That's Brendan, and so yeah, you'll find us there under those names. Sometimes I think should I change it, but to be honest, people kind of recognize me there, and when we go to other spaces, they like I've had it happen a couple of times. It's like, oh yeah, Benny is here. Let's get him up. Let's give him a mic, and let's see what he thinks about the topic. So that's nice to build that reputation and to build it out there. I think that's a great thing to see.
Absolutely. Outside of X, and the two websites, are there any Facebook groups that you guys are that are part of that organization that people can look for? I just want to help people find you in it as many ways
Yeah.
as possible, because some people might not be on X, but they're Facebookers.
Yeah, so we do have like an account on like LinkedIn, like via Stoic account. We are building the Facebook group. We are just looking for the right angle to give that extra value. So we do have it, but it's kind of in development. We do have an Instagram as well via Stoica, and the personal accounts that we have. So you can find us there as well. I think the main thing is like via Stoica. That's the if you Google that, then you will find us. Like yeah, on those platforms.
Well, thank you, Benny. It's been a pleasure spending time with you.
Yeah, the same, and thanks for having me. It's such a great conversation, and it's just inspiring to speak to people who are enthusiastic and ready to listen to people and have their own experience to share to it. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, and we'll do a part 2 down the road. Thanks a lot, Benny. Take care. Have a good night. Thank you for tuning in to episode 3 of the Freak Time Mastermind podcast with Benny Vonkin and also Street Stoics, his podcast with Bryce. If you have any questions, you can reach out to him through his website. I'll have in the description all of his various links and socials. And no matter what platform you're watching this on, be sure to like, subscribe, whatever you're supposed to do on your respective platform. And we appreciate you. If you'd like to join the Free Time Mastermind group, a mastermind for entrepreneurs, the information is somewhere down here. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.